Henry, but I will welcome everyone again. Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the 85th Freehof Book and Author Series, honoring the memory of Violet Marcus, who chaired this committee for 20 years and did fabulous things. And everyone remembers her, greeting everybody at the top of the stairs at Temple and acting in skits for the women of Rosenblum and doing all kinds of things. And so our committee is very happy to dedicate this to her memory. And I want to, my committee is Ellen Primus and Goldie Katz and myself, Rico Chase. And it is my great privilege to honor, It is my great privilege and honor to introduce Rabbi Sharyn Henry. Rabbi Sharyn Henry received her undergraduate degree with honors in psychology at the University of Wisconsin in 1980, and her rabbinic ordination from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion with a master's degree in Hebrew letters in 1988. In 2013, she received her doctorate of divinity degree from HUC-JIR. After her rabbinic ordination, Rabbi Henry became the assistant rabbi at Temple Congregation B'nai Jedudah in Kansas City, Missouri, and later the rabbi educator at Temple Ohav Shalom in Allison Park. She has been with Rosenblum congregation since 1999. At Rosenblum, Rabbi Henry first served as principal, later titled Youth and Education Director of our religious school. She became rabbi of the congregation in 2004. Her rabbinic focus is on worship, social action, and inclusion. Rabbi Henry was recognized by Community Living and Support Services with a humanitarian award for her advocacy in equality and inclusion. Last year, she was honored with the establishment of the Rabbi Sharyn H. Henry Social Justice Award. That award and its endowment fund will offer biennial financial support to a social justice cause that has made a significant change in our region. Rabbi Henry is married to Dennis Grinberg. They have two sons, Avi and Asher, and live in Squirrel Hill. Rabbi Henry will be reviewing The Color of Love by Marra Gad. Rabbi Henry?
So that bio was written before I had a dog. So I also have a dog named Toby, who's the best and makes life much better. So I'd like to say thank you to Harold and Chuck for being here. And it's my privilege to do this book review in memory and honor of Violet. Andy said, if you had questions, you could put them in the chat, but you can also ask me. You can wave your hand or, let me know you have something you want to ask or say as we're going. That's okay. I also just curious, like how many of you have read this book? So if you want to, you can raise your hand or you can put it in the chat. I know it was nice and short, and a couple of people told me that they had read it. So if you'd read it, I'd be curious to know what you thought. So I'm going to talk tonight about, I have seven sections. The first is two really very short biographical information. I'm going to overview the book. That's also pretty short. I'm going to share with you some things that Marra has. I'm calling her Marra, but it might be Marra because it has two R's in. I like Marra better. And then share with you some things that I found written, some interviews that I found were interesting. We're going to talk about identity, her Jewish and Black or mixed race identity. And at the very end, some more themes. And then at the very end, I'm going to talk about where do we go from here. So that's my outline. And I'm going to be looking at my other computer, which is directly in back of this. So if I'm not making good eye contact, I apologize. But I'm trying to read and talk and look at you and look at that dot in the middle of the computer and all those things at the same time. This is not so easy. Anyway, and thank you to Andy, who's working our technology. All right, so Marra Gad, this is her official bio. If you look her up, it will say she was born in New York and raised in Chicago. She is an independent film and television producer and now calls Los Angeles home. She's a graduate of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and she holds a master's degree in modern Jewish history from Baltimore Hebrew Institute at Towson University. This is the book. It's called The Color of Love. And I'm just going to go briefly over what the book is about. Basically, it's a memoir about her life as a mixed race Jewish girl adopted into a white Jewish family. So she was born in New York, and the family that adopted her lived in Chicago. So they took her back to Chicago, where she grew up. The first section of the book describes her life as a mixed race Jewish girl. So it talks about a lot of indignities and micro and some macro aggressions that she experienced as a result of her identity. And it talks about the way her family always protected her. So she gives an incident of something happening to her. It follows with what her family did to protect her, to defend her, not so much defend her, but really to protect her from that ever happening again from those same people. Because what they would do is they would cut out relatives and friends from their lives who would make any kind of reference to her skin color or her origin. They just would say, "You're out, we're done with you." And they would never talk to those people again, including sometimes kids, children. They would talk to their families. This includes her great aunt Nettie, and we'll talk in depth about her great aunt Nettie, but she was actually one of the worst offenders in terms of the racism that was directed at Marra. So in the second half of the book, the family discovers that Nettie has Alzheimer's, and she and her husband have become wards of the state, I guess. And the closest relative is Marra's mother. Marra's mother's sick, her sister has a baby, and so it becomes Marra, and the brother won't have anything to do with her. So it becomes Marra who has to go out to California and take care of Nettie and her husband, despite the fact that Nettie has been estranged from the family for 15 years because of a comment that she made at the sister's wedding. And I'm going to read all that part to you. So it's Marra's sister's wedding. So 15 years has passed, and she hasn't had anything to do with this aunt. And then this aunt is in need, and she decides that she's going to go and take care of her. So this is from the publisher, who wrote, "The Color of Love explores the idea of Yerusha, which means inheritance in Yiddish or Hebrew. This is a continuation of what they wrote. At turns heart-wrenching and heartwarming, this is a story about what you inherit from your family: identity, disease, melanin, hate, and most powerful of all, love. With honesty, insight, and warmth, Marra Gad has written an inspirational, moving chronicle proving that when all else is stripped away, love is where we return, and love is always our greatest inheritance." So before we jump into the themes of the book and more depth, I'd like to read to you an article that was in a Jewish Book Council called "If Now When," on why she decided to write this book now, when she wrote it. So I thought it was a really interesting thing. It's not very long, so I'm going to share it with you. Okay. If not now, when? Marra Gad on writing her story. This was December 2019. One of the first questions that I'm asked when I'm doing a book event or being interviewed is, why did you decide to write this book now? For the last many weeks, I've given the same answer. I chose to write this book now because in some ways society has changed. We are now talking about race, religion, and those who are considered other in ways we have not in the past. So it seemed like the right time to shine a light on my own life and how I have chosen to live in a world that has often told me that I should not exist in the way that God created me. And in many ways, every word of that is true. But society is also not all that different. I am still gawked at and whispered about. I was denied service at a restaurant just last week. And much like it was in the 1970s and 1980s, on Rosh Hashanah morning this year, a woman sitting next to me in synagogue could not contain herself at the sight of me. She stared, wrenched her neck, craned her neck to watch me pray, and interrupted me to ask me what I was doing there. For me, it often feels like it is still 1979, where I'm still the only brown Jew in a sea of white faces. So I'm continuing to consider the question, why now? Perhaps the more complete answer is that I am different because I have both found and claimed my voice. For the first few decades of my life, I did not have a voice. As a child, my parents spoke for me when we were faced with racism, and that was as it should be. No child should ever experience the things I did. No 7-year-old should go to synagogue and hear a rumor widely being spread that my mother had been raped by a Black man, and that's why I look this way. I am grateful that I had parents who spoke the words that I could not say as a child in the face of intolerance that I could not comprehend. Even today, my mother will ask me if I want her to come to wherever the last crime has taken place. She will always be my greatest defender. As I grew older, I chose not to use my voice because I wanted people to like and approve of me. Speaking about being biracial and Jewish and the horrible things I faced wasn't exactly party conversation. It made people palpably uncomfortable, and I did not want to create more discomfort than there already was, so I did not speak. Instead, I did my best to fit in and hope that I did not draw attention to my uniqueness. Of course, it didn't work. Instead, people talked about me, sometimes in whispers and other times in screams. My silence did nothing but further leave me separate, choking on the words that I really wanted to say. Then I learned that under some circumstances, silence could keep me safe. That when faced with a racist or intolerant bully, it is best to stay quiet, for racists don't like it when there is pushback. Just hold your breath and your tongue. The moment will pass and you will stay safe. So I did. That served me well on more than one occasion, for it kept my body alive and whole, but never has my silence served my soul. I choked on my silence for decades. At times I was unable to find the words, and at other times I was fearful if I did. Like the intolerance that created my silence, that too is poison. When the societal door opened about 5 or 6 years ago, I saw an increased desire in talking about my personal story. I also found that because I never used my own voice and told the story myself, people were telling me what my story must be. A tragic mulatto girl, I was called. Someone who needed to find herself by finding her biological relatives, I was told. None of that is true. I knew when people started telling me my story in every inaccurate way that it was time to claim my voice and tell my story. So I have, and it only took me 50 years to do so. When my book tour began, a few of my rabbi friends cautioned me not to be cliche when asked the question, why now? By giving the answer that Hillel gave us, if not now, when? But if we look at the whole of Hillel's often quoted lines, his questions truly are a perfect answer to the one posed for this essay. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? I must speak my own truth if I want people to hear me, and I will never again allow anyone to tell me what my story should be. We should all be the authors of our own stories. All of our stories matter. If I am only for myself, who am I? In a world growing ever more beautifully diverse, our stories lay the groundwork for those who come after us. As someone who never had anyone like me to look to as a child, if I can be that face, voice, and person to those who are coming after me, it is my honor. I claim that honor by sharing my story. And if not now, when? It's really nice. I think it's just a really, really nice essay. That's why now. That's why she wrote the book now. And so I'm going to go on to my first theme, which is identity. And she talks about that. I'm going to now read to you from the book, because this is the way the author describes her adoption. And it's such a really, really interesting story. Sorry. I was born on my father's birthday. My parents were out celebrating and received a message that I had arrived and that they should head to New York to pick me up. And so they flew from Chicago to Binghamton and went straight to the hospital. My mother tells me that my adult lifestyle and colorful and at times dramatic personality are not a surprise, given that I was kept in a private nursery surrounded by guards to ensure that I did not end up in the wrong hands. When the attorney arrived to hand me off to my parents, he went into the nursery, leaned over to look into the crib, and turned in shock to the neonatal nurse. "Are you sure that's the right baby?" "That's the baby," she replied. I was the color of milk chocolate and had a head full of dark, curly hair. He apparently became even paler than usual, his face having drained of all color. Today, there would be a bidding war for a baby who looked like me, but that was not the case in 1970. And while it seems my biological mother was a young, unwed, and shall we say, passionate creature, she was also smart and forward-thinking enough to know it was unlikely she would find a family willing to unknowingly take a mixed-race baby. And so she did not disclose that her lover had been Black and left the rabbi was the one who was making the connection, and left the rabbi, his attorney, and my parents to sort it all out. The rabbi apologized to my parents and told them that they didn't have to take me. After all, a mixed race baby wasn't what they had signed up for. But my parents and I had already fallen in love. Returning me was not an option because to them, no mistake had been made. When they looked into my crib, they didn't see a mixed race baby. They saw their new daughter, and at 3 days old, I was taken home to Chicago. I like the story. And there was an interview that I found in Jewish Boston where Marra says, "The minute the rabbi said there had been a mistake and my parents didn't have to keep me, that was the moment they declared their understanding of B'Tselem Elohim, created in God's image." This is like really beautifully put. I mean, she has such a nice and generous way of describing what happened. However, when she was still a child, Marra came to realize that she was, quote, "a mixed race Jewish unicorn," unquote. In her story, she faced religious discrimination because of her race and racial discrimination because of her religion. In Black spaces, she was not Black enough, or told that it was okay to be Christian or Muslim, but not Jewish. In Jewish spaces, she was mistaken for the help, asked to leave, or even worse. Even in her own extended family, and certainly among friends and the larger Jewish community, including their synagogue, racism bubbled to the surface. So I'm going to read from the book about in her family. This incident in her family. I actually read this like 2 or 3 times because I couldn't believe it. This is page 27. So she's talking about her Aunt Goldie, who came to visit. So they would have family come to visit and stay for lengths of time. And this was her Aunt Goldie. This is probably a great aunt. Goldie lived in Las Vegas, and her sense of style reflected her home city. She was loud and tacky in her brightness, sequins during the daytime, mismatched colors that screamed at you when you glanced her way. She had chain smoked, and her gruff voice sounded like the 2 packs she smoked per day were more like 12. She came for a visit each year, staying for a few weeks so that she might catch up with her family. So this is an incident that happened at one of these visits. When my sister and I were around 3 and 5 years old, Goldie was in town visiting. Oh, I should say that as soon as her parents adopted her, they told the rabbi they wanted more children. And then, of course, the parents conceived and had 2 biological children following this adoption. Okay, when my sister and I were around 3 and 5 years old, Goldie was in town visiting. We were in the backyard playing, and Goldie took my sister onto her lap to read her a book. So I came close and asked if I could sit on her other knee. "No," Goldie rasped, But you can be a good girl and clean up my cigarette butts. Your mother and Bubby will like that. I did as I was told until my mother came outside and saw what was going on. Marra, Beth Ann, she screamed. I had never seen my mother's face get so red. Her nostrils flared as she continued, what are you doing? It was the first time I'd ever seen my mother lose it, and I wasn't quite sure why she was losing it. I had been told to do something by one of my elders, and so I was doing it. Aunt Goldie told me to clean it all up, I stammered, starting to cry. Stop that immediately. And Elisa, that's her sister, go into the house. And so she did. Elisa went in the house. My mother drew me close to her, hugging my tear-stained face into her belly while she laid into Goldie with a tone of voice I had never heard before. What is wrong with you? My mother rarely speaks loudly, but she was screaming. How could you stoop so low as to treat one of my daughters like a slave while you read a book to the other? My mother stopped her rant to take a deep breath. She saw how clearly upset and confused I was, and the volume of the discussion wasn't helping things. She held me tighter, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. What is wrong with you, Goldie? At a certain point, I was also sent into the house, and my bubby joined the argument. I couldn't really hear the words being hurled in the backyard, but afterward, Goldie packed her bags immediately, and we never saw her again. She had been told to leave, and she was not welcome back under any circumstances. So that was what they did. You know, if there was an incident, they just said, leave and you're not welcome here. Sometimes I think, you know, that it's not so common. It's not so common for people to do that. Like we often, in my opinion, we often protect the wrong people. You know, where we'd be like, oh, you know, they didn't mean it, shouldn't mean anything. But if someone was really racist, I mean, having her clean up her cigarette butts is, like I said, I first read that and I thought, well, I must have missed something. All right, so now I'm going to read you what she read about dating, because that was another place where it just didn't go well for her. She's 50 years old and not married. She said, one of the most poisonous lies I have ever been told was that no man would ever be comfortable enough with my otherness to take me home to meet his family, and many a man has told me that tale. So she's talking about a friend named Joe. No, she's talking about a boy named Ron. Ron was someone I had known since my college days, and in our immediate post-college life, we sat on the same Jewish charity board for young adults. Our social circle was small, and our socializing almost always amounted to making the rounds at the most popular bars or going to parties. Ron, then in medical school, started to show up all the places where I was partying. He would often walk me to my car, ask me to dance. He even brought me flowers on the night of one of our board meetings. When are you going to finally ask me out? I asked him one night, take me on a date. Ron grew immediately uncomfortable, and the silence told me I was absolutely not going to like what he had to say. I think you're brilliant, he said finally, and beautiful and funny and kind and wonderful and amazing, but I can't take you on a date because I wouldn't know how to explain you to my family. I did not understand. Perhaps I did not want to understand, so I simply said, why? And he took a deep, pained breath and said, look at you. How could I explain your skin color to my parents? I felt the rage and the hurt well up as quickly as the tears did. I launched into an immediate listing of all the things about me that made me, I thought, the perfect, nice Jewish girl. For goodness sake, I cried, I speak Hebrew fluently. And then so she goes to her friend. This is her friend Joe. And she expects him to say that he was being racist and stupid, but instead Joe said quite the opposite. In the name of our friendship, he began, I feel it is my obligation to tell you that you shouldn't expect to find a Jewish boy to marry. I hadn't thought anyone could dumbfound me more than Ron had, but Joe continued, we have talked about it. You are smart, funny, and pretty, but Ron is right. You are too complicated to bring home. Jewish girls don't look like you. And I don't see any guy feeling comfortable bringing you home to meet his family. Even with tears visibly swelling in my eyes, he pressed on and spoke the words that brought it all home. I mean, a lot of us would like to sleep with you. We've talked about it, but that's where it would end. I don't want you to delude yourself into thinking there would be anything more. Racism wrapped in the guise of friendship is perhaps one of its cruelest forms. Really? Who said really? It's pretty shocking, right? So she said she'd had lots of first dates, but she didn't have any second dates really. And then okay, so now she's talking about, this is just this is the end of what I'm going to read you. One night she was on a date. She goes, really, there was a second date. There was dinner, a grand charm offensive, and then the full court press for a sexual sort of dessert. One night on one such date with an attorney from San Francisco, enough wine had flowed for me to have the courage to ask him directly why on earth he elected to hop a flight to Chicago for a date. Surely, I said, there are plenty of suitable options in California. And as the wine had loosened his tongue as well, my suitor replied without even a hint of delicacy, are you kidding? I had to come. I've never met a Jewish girl who looks like you, and let's face it, Jewish boys have jungle fever. I know Harold is making a face like, what kind of terrible thing is that to say? So I already told you some of the things, or shared with you some of the things that people said at synagogue. And here's what she's, here's another interaction about what happened in a synagogue. Make sure I didn't skip something. Yeah. Okay. This is also in Jewish Boston. She wrote, I'm turning 50 in April, and once upon a time, I used to explain myself to people, particularly when I attended synagogue. Some people thought I was a caregiver, or they automatically sent me to the kitchen. This past Rosh Hashanah, I went to services in LA with a friend, and a woman would not stop staring at me. She asked my friend what I was doing there, and he told her that I usually go to Chicago to be with my family for the holiday, but I decided to stay in LA this year. What this woman was asking was why there was a Black woman seated next to her at service, even though she had watched me pray in impeccable Hebrew. And then she wrote, if people who are confounded to see a non-white Jew don't immediately apologize, they dig in. They don't understand you can exist in my form and be a Jew. Sometimes she just says these things and I just feel so bad. You know, you don't look like, I'm not going to take you home. I can't explain your skin color. Or you can exist in they don't understand you can exist in my form and be a Jew. So then she has the problem in Black spaces as well. She talks about one time when she went to, she had a friend who was also adopted. That friend was Black, not mixed race, but Black. And she had the curly hair and she had it straightened, and Marra really wanted her hair straightened. And so she found out like where they went, and they went to this place in Chicago, but the people in the shop were like commenting to each other about that she didn't look Black enough, and why was the mother wearing her grandmother wearing a big Jewish star, and it sounded like a terrible experience. Plus it really hurt, I guess, what they put on her head. So this is about being in Black spaces. So we already see the problem in Jewish spaces, but she has the same problem in Black spaces. She says, I've been born into two tribes, Black and Jewish, who should both know what it is to be treated badly because you are considered other. In my book, I say we should do better than this. I say we because I view it as a collective problem. I continue to be baffled at the way we in the Jewish community go out of our way to tell each other that we're not Jewish enough. We can't even agree on how to spell Hanukkah. It's not that hard. The Torah teaches us how to treat each other. Sorry, I thought that was going to be about being Black, but I mentioned I made a mistake when I cut. But I mentioned the parts about where she go places and they'd say, but you're not really Black because you're part white, and that she gives that example in the hairdresser. I think she's more, she has way more negative experiences in the Jewish community than she does in the Black community. So now I'm going to talk about the URJ biennial. This was in December of 2019. I was there. Perhaps some of you were there as well. I don't know, Tara, if you were there, but Marra was at, because her book had just come out. She was there to talk about it, 2019. So she was there to talk about her book. So she had a presenter badge, and she wrote about this on Facebook, and a lot of my colleagues were commenting on it. So I happened to see it, and then I friended her. So we're Facebook friends, although we've never met. But this is what she said. She talked about what happened at the URJ Biennial. She had put this up on Facebook. She wrote about how a woman there at the Biennial assumed that Marra was on the hotel staff, and she would complain to her about her room service, even though she was, she had a big presenter badge on. And she didn't apologize. Like when Marra said, look, no, I don't work in hotel. I mean, I'm a presenter here. And she didn't say, oh, I'm so sorry. She just continued to, I don't know, give her a hard time. I don't think she talks about really what happened, but she said, sometimes it makes sense to engage in a conversation with someone about how badly that just went, and sometimes it doesn't. Had this woman apologized, that would have been a different thing, but she wasn't sorry for mistaking me for the help. So then Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who's the president of the Reform Movement, the URJ, he apologized. So she put this up on Facebook, and all these people were writing and how horrible, and we feel so bad, and we're so sorry that happened to you. And he saw it, and he apologized on the Facebook page. And he said, I need to publicly apologize to Marra Gad, who endured numerous acts of racism at the recent URJ Biennial in Chicago. I'm the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, and what happened to Marra happened on my watch. I'm deeply sorry for each painful encounter. I said there were more than just that one. And then he said, this is the rest of his comment. He said, Marra and I spoke yesterday, and I heard in her own words the pain of coming home to her movement's biennial and being made to feel other and unsafe. She came to Biennial as a featured presenter to share her extraordinarily powerful and moving memoir, The Color of Love, which documents her lifelong encounter with racism in our Jewish community. Her message could not be more timely and urgent. We must all acknowledge that racism isn't only out there somewhere. Racism lives as well in our Jewish communities, and it lives in each of us. We can't work to dismantle structures of racism in our society until we acknowledge that. The change we are tackling requires our commitment to go very deep at the very moment when hate, bigotry, and racism are being fomented all around us. This change we desperately need will not happen quickly, but what's at stake is our integrity as a Jewish community. So he took it very seriously. However, I don't know about anything that's happened since. I mean, there haven't been any great initiatives from the movement about, there've been some small things, but there haven't been any big initiatives. Although I will say that there was just a person hired as the director of inclusion who is a Jew of color. There was one before too. Okay, so my second to last theme is, how are we doing on time? No one ever told me how long I was supposed to go, so I've probably about 10 more minutes. Or less. So the next theme is silence. And for this, I'm going to read to you from, I found this to be very powerful. This is from the Jewish Book Council. And it's from June 12th of this year. So she says, and it's her own essay, she's not being interviewed. As a newly minted author, a few months ago, I published a memoir, and recently I began writing for television. I find words tremendously important. The advent of social media has made them even more important. When multiple venues for people to speak to family, friends, and strangers alike, or with multiple venues for people to speak to friends, family, and strangers alike, people are doing just that. Some share their every thoughts with seemingly no filter. Others carefully curate their words along with their filtered photographs, wanting to communicate a version of their life and thoughts in a deeply deliberate way. All of this has only made me pay attention to language even more. I'm routinely stunned by the shocking, insensitive, and violent language that is casually thrown around. The personal attacks suggesting that people should either die or kill themselves simply because they shared an opinion or exist in a form that another finds distasteful. People sound off into the void of the internet, rarely considering that real people with real feelings are taking in their words. They speak as if those other people do not exist. As a biracial Jewish woman, I know from a very personal place how painful it is when people choose to speak about me as if I don't exist. And this abuse of language is now quite common in our society. But in the wake of the protest movement born out of the outrage over the murder of George Floyd a few weeks ago, perhaps more than ever, what we say or don't say matters. To me, the world has felt loud with language for quite some time, and the volume has only increased with the advent of the protests. I certainly consider that to be a good thing. People have taken to the streets by the thousands shouting, Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace, hands up, don't shoot. It is a demand to be heard, and it is heard, and it is powerful. But to me, it is the silence, the absence of words that is equally powerful in this seminal moment in America and equally loud. There are times when silence is a positive thing. There are moments of silence being offered as a sign of mourning and respect for those Black men and women who we have lost to, she's a writer, she should say whom, we have lost to police brutality. We are seeing video after video of people kneeling in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in tribute to George Floyd. And that long silence is a palpable way to consider what it must have felt for him as he lay on the ground begging for his life and his mother. But then there is the other kind of silence, born out of apathy, discomfort, inaction. And that silence has been screaming at me, particularly when it comes from those who have recently taken to calling themselves anti-racist, claiming to be allies and supporters of Black and brown people. And here's where I just feel personally guilty. Is coming from everywhere, from people I once considered friends, from organizations calling themselves progressive, from clergy. And that silence has devastated me. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is perhaps one of the most quoted people on social media. His daughter, Bernice King, recently shared his statement that there is a point in time when silence is betrayal. For me, now is that moment. When I have called out the silence on my social media, some of the responses have been equally devastating, especially those from people who write that they simply don't consider it to be their issue. That is the ultimate betrayal because it says that we, as Black people, are still not all seen as being deserving of equal rights and justice. But a great many people are silent because they don't know what to say, because they are afraid of saying the wrong thing and receiving retribution for it, and because the conversation is for them an uncomfortable one. Sometimes silence just feels easier. I understand choosing silence from that place all too well. It took me nearly 50 years to claim my voice and speak openly and honestly about the pain of growing up biracial and Jewish in a society that still sadly clings to the misconception that Jews are white and Black people are either Christian or Muslim. But eventually my own silence felt like a betrayal. I was betraying myself by not speaking up. I was betraying the children who have come after me, beautifully multiracial and Jewish, who need to know that their voices deserve to be heard, that they, like me, deserve to be honored for identity, not challenged because of it. In the face of a world, so that was from a different article. And then she says, there are many people who have reached out to me to say that they just don't know what to say or what to do. I tell them that if you cannot find the words, lift up someone else's words. I offer that I find that when I let myself sit quietly, the words that I need come like a gift. There is always a way to speak when we want to. In the end, the choice to be silent is ours, as is the choice to speak. And right now I am listening intently to every word said and to every word not said. I believe that the scream currently being heard around the world, demanding equal justice for all, is a result of the many centuries of silence that preceded it. And I hope that the people who are still staying silent in this moment will ask themselves why. And then, so that's sort of a challenge to us. The last theme is love. so her relationship with this aunt Nettie, is central to the story, and it's central to the story of racism as well. Nettie is this glamorous, fashionable woman. Apparently, she like weighs 89 pounds, and she wears fancy, glittery clothes all the time. And Marra is really wants her affection and really wants her attention, and she really admires her for sort of worldliness. But this woman is particularly hateful to Marra because she's Black, and she's really nice to the other sister and the brother, but she's really mean, in terms of like, she won't read her a story, and when she's giving out jewelry, she won't give her any jewelry, but the aunt gives the jewelry to the sister. And throughout the whole book, she's trying to get her attention. At Marra's sister's wedding, Nettie tells Marra that our family is very. I'm just going to redo that one section, not the whole thing, just that one, because I want to get the words exactly right. So she's this is like before the wedding starts, and everyone's sitting there, and she says, Nettie says to Marra, who's so excited about her sister's wedding. Her sister's known this man for 7 years. They met at camp. It's a very sweet story. Nettie says to her, we were a very liberal family to let you in the first place. Nettie continued, taking a long pull from her martini. I mean, me having a Chinese husband is one thing, but nothing is worse than Black. And then, so this woman is horrible, and they don't see her for 15 years. And then she ends up having this Alzheimer's, and they become wards of the state, as I said. And Marra goes to take care of her because the mother is the closest person, but she can't go. Marra takes care of her with grace, with compassion, with dignity, to make sure that her dignity is maintained. Sometimes that is just really challenging when people get old and have Alzheimer's. She arranges for Nettie to go to Chicago so she could be near family, and she endures a lot of abuse from Nettie while she does that. I mean, it's just really awful behavior. But then after a while, Nettie's Alzheimer progresses to the place where she apparently forgot who she was, who Marra was, and she starts to call her beautiful and say really nice things to her. In any case, Marra decides that as soon as she gets to Chicago, she's done with her. She's done. She's not going to do anything more. And eventually, she decides to go and see her, and does go and see her frequently until she dies, and takes care of her. And they even go on Nettie and her husband want their ashes buried at sea, and they go out and they take care of it, and they do everything the way they're supposed to do it. And this is just the end. I'm going to share something that she wrote. This is not from the book. She says, "I choose love always." Throughout her life, Marra faced discrimination of all kinds from all sides. Instead of becoming an instrument that puts more hate in the world, Marra turned again and again to love. Her story serves as a reminder, a guide for all of us from all backgrounds to choose love always. And that's the message of the book. And I just wanted, I have a few, just something to say about in terms of like next steps, but I'd be curious to hear if you have any questions or any comments. Or Harold. Yeah, Harold.
You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I did. First of all, this story is heartbreaking to me. But I have to say, before I ask my question, how meaningful it is that this book is being reviewed in our mother's memory. Because as I said in her eulogy, that the greatest lesson she taught her boys was that you only judge somebody by what's in their heart, not the color of their skin, not their sexual preference. And you all know that she spent her career at EEOC fighting discrimination. So it's quite meaningful that this book is being reviewed now. My question is, at its root, well, first of all, we've all heard our rabbis give wonderful, wonderful sermons through the years about hatred and about racism. But Jews aren't any different than anybody else. And there's a lot of Jewish racism out there, which I don't understand given our history of surviving the Holocaust and the 6 million who didn't. I don't understand how a Jewish mind can be racist. But my question is it fair of us to ask our rabbis and our congregations to speak specifically at times and programming at times specifically to Jewish racism? And how do we address that?
Well, I mean, I think I am right now.
Yeah.
Right.
But we've got to get it out to not
Mhm,
just
mhm.
25 people on a book review. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I agree with that.
And
And
people think we're Jews. We don't think that way, but plenty of Jewish people feel that way as well.
I agree. And so we have been on a little bit of a journey.
And Mike, I think what I wanted to say is, why do we have to wait for the movement to do something based on what they said? Why can't we do it within our...
I don't think we do, but I was just saying that, even after this thing happened a year ago, I expected to see some initiatives, but nothing happened. But you're 100% right. We don't need to. But over the summer, so some of us were reading some books about like how to be an anti-racist and about white fragility, and talking amongst ourselves about some of these, about being racist, sort of owning the racism, not the kind of white supremacy racism that we might think about, like Ku Klux Klan racism, but just the kind of racism that we have because we were all of us on the screen that I can see, born white, have the kind of privileges that we have. I have just the way we were educated. So we have begun that conversation, Harold. I think it's a really long one. And in effect, what I wanted to say is that we just now started an anti-racism task force at Rosenblum just now to start looking at these kinds of issues and talking to ourselves and like really asking ourselves, I don't know if we can answer why we do it, but like what we can do about it, or like, what we can do about it and how we can become anti-racist, like, how we can look at it, not be afraid to acknowledge it and say, but I want to behave in a different way. So I think I would love to have other people talking about it other than me. I would love that. Andy.
Sharon, that's great points, because I was going to bring up that when you were talking and when I read the book and I was seeing what was happening to her, I was thinking of the other books that we've read. I know Sisterhood has been doing a lot of programming on this, and you've helped us immensely with a lot of the discussions and the book discussions that we've been doing since I think July was the first one. And what I'm seeing is the same thing. I was taught to teach my children not to look at color. After reading and looking at a lot of the books that I've been reading, that's not the point, because this is what she was dealing with. Yes, she's Jewish. She's also Black. We obviously see her skin color and need to accept that we see her skin color, but that has nothing to do with her being Jewish. It doesn't mean that she works at the synagogue or that she works at a hotel or that she's staff for somebody. Anybody can come in and sit in a synagogue, and we want to be welcoming to anybody, no matter what their color is. And I read the story and I was just so sad that she had to deal with so much of this, that her parents had to, from her own family, not even just from the synagogue, but from family. And I think that's what we're trying to fight about and have these discussions about, is so people can see that we need to start looking past that.
Right. And so, right. And I was going to say, and it sort of answer Harold too, I left out this paragraph, but her family was great about defending her, but they never talked about race in their family. They never talked about it. They never, like they wouldn't even mention it, like as if and I don't know how many of you watch This Is Us, but this year on This Is Us is really interesting. So just really briefly, there's 3 characters. They're were raised as triplets, but 2 of them are what? 2 of them are biological twins. They're 2 out of the 3. The third died, and the third is a Black child who was abandoned, but he was raised with the family. They adopted him, they raised him in the family. The thing is that like they never talked about race with him. They never asked him, they just never talked about it. And finally he's saying like, you all pretended that that we were all the same, or that I was just different because I'm smart, because he was the smart one. But no one ever talked to me about race. And now all of a sudden her sister's saying something to him about George Floyd or whatever, and he's like, but you never talked about this with me before. The family never acknowledged it. And it's the same thing that happened in this family. As well, they would defend her, they would never have conversations about race. Like I think a lot of us, my family never talked about it either when I was growing up.
Is that part of, you said one of the things you read said that she was talking about silence equals betrayal. I think that's another part of silence, is that what I was taught growing up, you don't talk about it, you ignore it, you don't want to do anything to hurt somebody else. I was taught to accept anybody as they walked in, but I was also taught by a very liberal father that you just don't talk about it. And I think that's part of what we're trying to change the culture of, is that of course we have to talk about it. Differences, we see them all the time. It doesn't make them right or wrong. The more we talk about it, the less they're problematic.
And some of the differences are wrong, like some of the ways that people are treated are wrong. And we need to acknowledge that it's because of race, that's how they're treated. Yeah, Aaron.
Can I, with all due respect to everything what everyone's saying, I think we're talking about this very delicately. That is to say, we're even speaking of it in the passive voice. We're speaking of how people are treated, right? Or that we can't believe that I was raised not to be racist. I can't believe there's racism in the Jewish community. I was raised not to see color, but I understand that was now well-intentioned, but in error. But if we really are talking, the reason I think this is so fraught is because what we're really talking about or putting on the table is our own complicity, which is a very difficult place to start the conversation. So I think it's actually not the healthiest place to start the conversation for a group that's as homogeneous as ours, with regard to experience, as broad as we may be in terms of what we bring to this particular Zoom table or this particular rabbi's table. Rabbi Henry's convened us to discuss a book and a woman's experience and to think about how it impacts us or reflects on us. I just think that there are things that are baked into a system that we were born into, that we kept perpetuating because we didn't know any different. And now we realize, be really graphic, there's blood on our hands.
But when we were young, we didn't know the difference.
We didn't know
I was raised
exactly.
in Seattle where we didn't have as much of it. But and a little black girl moved into our neighborhood. I think I was in the third grade, and she was my friend. And then one of my other friends stole her away, and I was annoyed. But she was the only one there, so everyone wanted to be with her.
So, Aaron, where do you think
what you're saying, Aaron? Aaron, what are you saying?
So
I don't understand.
No, I think it's a very powerful, important conversation. But the reason it's so fraught, I think, is for a group of white folk and socioeconomically privileged white folk. That's not a problem. That's not a fault, but it is a challenge to us as we try amongst ourselves to gain an understanding of what all this is about, for others, for us, where we fit in, where we intersect, what we can do now. And so I'm excited by this series of topics we've been discussing. And I think it's amazing. I think we need to now invite others and go broader and make it a monthly book club or keep exploring, but with a real degree of humility, that what we're really trying to say is I feel guilty about this.
Well,
I feel really, what?
I did. I said when I was reading the part about clergy being silent, I said, I take this personally. I feel really badly about this. I feel like I haven't said enough, so. Yeah.
And we're trying to figure out what to say, right? Rather than say something, let's figure out what do we all want to say for ourselves? How do we want to be different? And how do we want to teach and leave a legacy that's different? That's the challenge I think that our tradition puts in front of us. Now you have a knowing. Your eyes have been opened. Mine has been opened. We all see the world differently than we did 12 months ago, right? It's going to be the end of the year. There's going to be all the retrospectives in this month of who we've lost. There's going to be a lot of 275,000 people on that list are COVID. right? What are we going to do with the time we have before us? What are we going to leave? How are we going to be different tomorrow than we were yesterday? That's the essential Jewish question. And we just got to figure out, how do we begin to really get a handle on that? I think it begins with a lot of humility for our own sense of culpability. And then let's understand so we can be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. And we can teach children and sorry?
And that's what Harold said, like, why,
Exactly.
we're talking about this. So
exactly.
That's why we're doing this.
That's why.
That's why we're having all these discussions.
Right, exactly. So let's link this into the anti-racism task force. Rabbi Henry was mentioning that we're meeting again in December. It's great.
Right. So so my first point was to go, if we go from here, was just to say about this anti-racism task force, which is very small. It's going to stay small, but it's going to put out, its job is to touch other organizations and all parts of the congregation, and to bring these ideas to all these parts of the congregation. But I said that so far over the summer we read a couple of books, and I'm proposing that I'm going to my next book that I'm going to be reading. I tried to read a couple years ago and I couldn't do it. I'm going to try it again. Is where is it? The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And the reason I picked this one and the movie 13th, and I can put it in the chat if you want, is because I'm just learning more. I'm interested in learning more about the racial imbalances in our criminal justice system. I mean, especially because we live in a state with, because it's a problem, and we live in a state where there's capital punishment and where there's national capital punishment happening. And it's going to happen worse before Trump is out of the White House. But so in today's news, some of you might have heard this, that there was a study that was done by a watch group that shows some pretty significant racial disparities in Allegheny County's criminal justice system. Briefly, thank you for putting that briefly. 44% of misdemeanor, between May and June, 44% of misdemeanor defendants in Allegheny County were Black, even though just 13% of the county's population is Black. And also among males, Black defendants were more likely than their white counterparts to be subjected to money bail before trial. That's a huge problem. People don't have the money. I was also in that same story that was, I don't know if it was on the radio, but it was definitely on the WESA website, was that a Duquesne law professor, this is what, I don't know if it's a man or woman, they said, Jalila Jefferson Bullock said, such disparities date back to the days of slavery. So actually and that is such a kind of thing to hear. And Michelle Alexander does talk about that. And so does the movie 13th. It's a documentary, it's on Netflix right now. It's about an hour and a half. It's talking about, it starts with slavery, and then it talks about how the Constitution says, not the Constitution, the amendment, Constitution. When slavery was abolished, it said that everyone's free except for criminals. And then what happens then is that our country goes about making Black people into criminals. And we would like to not believe that and say, oh, no, that couldn't be true. It wasn't on purpose. But if you start to read these books and start to understand, you could see that it's been systematic ever since slavery ended. And so I'm interested in learning more about that myself. I did learn a bunch about it when I went to the museum in Montgomery, Alabama, about lynching, but it's really about like the whole history of criminalizing Black people, especially Black men. And so just to say it again, I think someone put it in the chat, but it's the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and then watching the movie 13th. And okay, and then I'll be letting you know when I'm ready to talk about that, probably sometime in January, to get through those. And if you're interested in reading or hear about it, we'll put that out there. But that's just what I'm interested in. We've read a couple of books. I can also recommend White Fragility, where we're afraid to, like where I said I was really impressed that Marra's family was willing to say to other people, no, you can't talk that way, and to make them be the bad guys, because they are the bad guys, as opposed to we're so careful to not hurt the white people's feelings. You know, they were so worried that someone's get offended. That's the white fragility problem. And we also read Anti-Racism by Ibram Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And we read Just Mercy. So we have a little bit, we've done a little bit, Harold, but we have a lot more to do.
And there are a lot of programs on some of the sitcoms on TV deal with racism. I watch, I don't know if anybody else. I
And
can't
Sharon,
remember.
WRS, one of the programs, we now have the program we're doing, The Forgotten Plight of Women Behind Bars. That's on February 4th. Also, I think somebody was telling me there's either a book or I don't know if it's an audio book or a written book that's out now about prisons being obsolete. That was, you used to have to pay for it, but I think they put it on audiobooks for free now.
I can say that Angela Davis has written about that. And Martha just put in a book called Cast, which I've heard is really good too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Isabel Wilkerson. I include that in my review of Cast, the review of Trevor Noah's book.
But I'm glad the world is starting to change a little bit. We need a lot of change, but it's changing a little bit. If you watch popular TV, or things there. The Bachelorette now, they have, mixed couples and everybody, So people are getting used to seeing everybody together. So it helps a little bit, but it doesn't, there's still a long way to go.
Do they ever end up with a mixed, does a couple ever, I mean, at the end of the story, is there ever a mixed race couple?
Oh yeah, there wasn't the last one, and now there's a Black woman on it. She's adorable. She's a mixed race, and a lot of white men are there dating.
Okay, because every time I stopped watching The Bachelor, but before I stopped watching it, I did notice that none of the if the Bachelor or the Bachelorette was white, which they all were, they never, in the end, they might have kept a person of color around for a while, but then they
the last
off the island.
the one before the the one before the present one, she fell in love with a Black man, and so they now there's a new one on there because she wanted to be with him, and I think they're going to get married. But it's good that they're and actually actually a friend of mine, well, this was a Black Indian woman actually, but a friend of mine's son was attracted to this woman. In New York Times, they have these funny write-ups about weddings. And he said he was attracted to her by her beautiful Black skin. It was an Indian woman. And he married her, and he lives in Washington, D.C. And her mother, and they converted to Judaism. But he gets funny comments sometimes, though, when he walks around with his daughters.
I'm hoping that Kamala will, they will have a woman, a Black mixed race, Black woman in the White House with I'm hoping that'll help. I'm hoping it'll help. Any other comments tonight? I'm so grateful to have been able to do this with you. I hope you're still interested and we can, reach out and do more work together. Anyone have anything?
Thank you so much for
Thank you for this, Rabbi Henry.
For your wonderful book review. And
That was great.
Thank you, Sharon. That was great.
For working on racism, which is a big problem.
That's a record. There does seem to be some movement.
I know you had it a while last year. Did you have a racist committee?
Also intensifying between Republicans and
You had
Democrats.
some sort of programs where you brought some of the Black,
Joining me now to help sort things out.
especially there's a Black Jewish woman who belongs to.
Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Rhoda?
You see the
I'm not sure. I can't hear either. There's something else happening.
Somebody is unmuted and talking.
Thank you, Sharon. This
Thank
was
you.
really
Thank
great.
you, Rabbi.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank
No, thank you,
Very
Sharon.
nice.
My pleasure.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Andy. Good night, John Boy.
Oh, well,
Good night, Mary Ellen.
Yeah.
Helen, I love that. I used to say that no one understood what I was saying when I was.
Yeah, I was, yeah.
Good night, Mary Ellen.
Hey, I like John Boy.
Grandma. And turn out the lights.
and on Monday,
Hotel 6, we leave the light on.
our next book review is going to be Monday, December. We've changed to Mondays now. It's going to be Monday, December 14th at 10:30. And Martha Burke is going to talk about from the